Thank you, everybody. Good evening. I'll take my glasses off my head because my head doesn't need to see. I am Susan Murray and I'm Director of the David Hume Institute, and I am delighted to welcome you all here this evening to this celebration of conversation and critical thinking. We're about to bring to a close our work on the legacy of David Hume and the now infamous racist footnote. This is a journey we have been on over the last few years. It's one of curiosity and asking questions to increase our understanding. Thank you to the National Lottery Heritage Fund and to the players of the National Lottery, without whom none of this work would have been possible. When we started thinking about how to approach this, we spoke to many people, and one of them was Professor Sir Geoff Palmer. He encouraged us to use Hume's own theories on himself. Hume did not believe that knowledge was created alone in a dark room just by thinking very hard. He believed that knowledge comes from the world around us and from experience and conversation with others. We used this approach of curiosity to consider how this work could help us to better understand our lives today. And in the course of asking these questions, we've worked with many partners to learn more about Edinburgh and the wider world that influenced Hume during his lifetime. There have been many elements to this project, and each element has helped us to have conversations in different ways and with many different audiences, such as commissioning a forum theatre production inspired by Hume's footnote and its legacy today. We got up close with versions of Hume's infamous footnote, letters and other works at the National Library of Scotland. And as part of this project, we've also worked with an extraordinary group of young people and hip-hop educators to inspire a new generation to think deeply about the issues raised by Hume and racism, power and heritage, and how they're all intertwined in our lives today. Yay! And I'm really glad you're all here tonight. All of this work has been captured in new resources and a 2-part documentary which are available on our website so that others can use this work and integrate it into their conversations going forward. Today, you are sitting here in Hume's former home, and from the timeline we drew up of his life, we think it's the very place he lived when he wrote the first version of the footnote. Most of you here today have joined us along the way in some parts of the journey, and we're really, truly thankful to all of you. We could not have had this conversation without you. Now, before we get underway into the content and Tommy and Irene, I just want to assure you there's no fire alarms planned, and if anything does go off, please just head to the nearest exit, which is either there or here. There is one behind the telly, but we're not going to use that one. There's also, we're recording the event. It's not being live streamed or anything, but that's why the speakers have microphones. They do not work for amplification in the room. So if anyone is struggling to hear, please do move to a seat near the front. And now, on to the main attraction. Tonight, we are very grateful to Professor Tommy Curry and Irene Mosota, who have both been part of our journey and have agreed to share some thoughts and reflections. Tommy is a scholar, author, and professor of philosophy. He holds the personal chair in Africana philosophy and Black male studies at the University of Edinburgh. In 2018, he won the American Book Award for The Man Not: Race, Class, Genre, and Dilemmas of Black Manhood. Tommy will be followed by reflections from Irene Mosota, the independent chair of the Edinburgh Slavery and Colonialism Review Implementation Group. I'm so sorry, I struggle with that every time I say the whole name. The group is tasked with overseeing and actioning the 10 recommendations approved by the City of Edinburgh Council in 2022. Tonight, as well as having the space to think deeply about an important issue, we hope you will all enjoy hearing from others and making new connections. Immediately after this session, we will head down. Come in. Welcome, have a seat, that's all right. You've missed my introduction, but it wasn't that good. Tonight, as well as having the space to think deeply about an important issue, we hope you will enjoy hearing from others and making new connections. Immediately after this session, we will head downstairs for refreshments and to watch a short performance of pupils from St Thomas of Aquinas High School. So thank you again for coming this evening, and I'll pass you over to Professor Tommy Curry.
All right. Good evening. The footnote with Hume has drawn lots of recent attention and controversy. And rather than just give you a historical lens, I really want to engage in a project of historiography with you. There are people in Scotland who, despite the evidence, seem to believe that we should no longer speak about the racism of people like Hume and Dugald Stewart. That somehow, because all white people were racist during this period of time, that somehow excuses the moral stain that's left on the university as well as our society. Next slide, please. What I want to do is share with you what I believe is the larger implication of Hume's intellectual legacy, not only at the university, but for people here in Scotland. I come from a country where racism is very open. It's shared by people throughout, and lots of people who do not have white skin are met with violence and disregard. And as much as we think that America is very far and distant from Scotland, I think it's much closer than we like to admit. In the 1750s and 1770, of course, with the other footnote, David Hume launched what would be an area of science, of racialist science, called ethnology. Next. What he suggested, and I don't want to read this because I'm sure we're all familiar with it, was that black people and other species of men were inferior to whites. People have discussed this. They've tried to apologize for it. They've said that this is not what he meant, despite the fact, next slide, he doubled down and specifically targeted black people in 1977. Now, Hume's arguments for the inferiority of black people weren't just about his opinions. These were taken to be facts. And it's this view that was shared about whether or not climate and geography actually affected the national temperament of different groups of people that will be used for generations to justify various aspects of racial inferiority theory, slavery, and colonialism. People like Immanuel Kant used Hume's footnote to substantiate the ideas that we were in fact inferior. In the Observations of the Beautiful and the Sublime, he quotes Hume to conclude that the Negroes of Africa have by nature no feeling that rises above the ridiculous. He continued that Mr. Hume challenges anyone to adduce a single example where a Negro had demonstrated talents and asserts that among the hundreds and thousands of blacks who have been transported elsewhere from their countries, although very many of them have been set free, nevertheless, not a single one has ever been found who has accomplished. Upon learning of a comment by a black carpenter criticizing whites for how they treated their wives, Kant replied, quote, "There might be something here worth considering except for the fact that the scoundrel was completely black from head to toe, a distinct proof that what he said was stupid," end quote. Now, the people who are arguing that we don't need to pay attention to Hume's racism presupposes that Hume did not make a statement that inspired others to reach the same conclusion. We are not dealing with an idle opinion. We're not dealing with someone's ignorance, as people like Tom Devine likes to pitch it to us. We're dealing with an opinion that fit very well within the Enlightenment theories of the time and served as the basis for justifying here at the University of Edinburgh the field of racial ethnology. Now, what makes Edinburgh so distinct and different from other universities in Europe, right, since one of the things Devine wanted to suggest was that it was not distinct and different, was that it embraced this notion of physiognomy. Physiognomy is the view from Johann Lavater that when we look at the external features of a face, nose shape, hair, beard, lips, complexion, that exterior tells us something about the interior. Now, what's fascinating about this is people like Immanuel Kant, even though he believed that black people were intellectually and morally inferior to whites, he rejected physiognomy. Physiognomy took hold in the English-speaking world in one place, and that place was the University of Edinburgh. So we have to attend to more than the footnote. We have to attend to the background, the conceptualization, and the utilization, how it functions. Next slide. People like Gordon Turnbull also used Hume's footnote to justify slavery. Now, this is what I want you to understand. I want you to think about the intellectual context and history here. We are not debating whether or not Hume himself supported slavery. It's irrelevant. The question is, did he provide a justification that other Europeans used for centuries to debate, justify, and rationalize the enslavement and colonization of African people because Hume suggested that they were less than human? That is the fundamental question that we're tasked to ask today as people who find it abhorrent that these kinds of ideas have remained undiscovered and unengaged until the 21st century. Now, the reason I wanted you to just take a look in Trumbull is because he says, it's not with the semblance, at least, of probable conjecture or reasonable hypothesis that Mr. Hume and other eminent writers imagined the Negro race to be an inferior species of mankind, but allowing that they are born equal with white men. Yet a minute observation or thorough knowledge of their character and disposition seems to evince that they are not at all fitted to fill superior stations or more elevated ranks in civil society. Now, Turnbull writes this about a little less than a decade after Hume revised the footnote. So for the people who think of Hume as just making an offhanded comment, ask yourself why he's being taken up and read by Kant in Germany and Turnbull here in the UK. What is the status that his opinion has about the deficiency of black people that so motivated both the UK and Germans to reflect upon it in their philosophy? So much so that we're reading about it 400 years later. Hume inspired a rationalization for the dehumanization of black people. And what our task is today is not to object just to Hume, but to object to the sentiment that took hold in the UK that still resonates today in contemporary anti-black racism. Next slide. Our task today is more so about refuting what I'm calling Scottish white supremacist historiography. Now, over the last few months, since we've released the Race Review report, we've been met with hostility from undisclosed faculty, racist whites, I don't know what else to call them in this country, who swear up and down that the racism of the Scottish Enlightenment is not a significant finding, okay? Now, what I want you to think about here is two things. One, what is our moral obligation to stamp out the seeds of hatred, right, and the mischaracterizations of people's humanity within a contemporary democratic society? That's the first question. The second question I want to ask you is this. When does grouping everyone in a certain time period, right? Let's take the Nazis, for example. Decrease the harms that they've committed morally and physically to other groups of people just to say that all the Nazis believe what Nazis believe. This is what we're being asked to accept about Hume and Enlightenment theorists. Black people are being told, you should not be bothered by the racism that we've unearthed in Dougald Stewart, James Kyle Pritchard, David Hume, Adam Ferguson, because everybody believed it. Well, not everybody believed it. Black people specifically responded to the arguments waged by Hume and Turnbull as a justification for slavery. We are teaching white Scottish history from the vantage point that there was no impetus, there was no effort, there was no resistance on the part of black people here in Scotland, throughout the world, to the racist nonsense that was coming from the University of Edinburgh. That is just fundamentally untrue. Cuyano, right, makes an adamant statement when he's responding both to Turnbull and to Hume. He says, intemperate, frenzy, enthusiastic, fanaticism may be variously applied and often wrongfully, but perhaps never better and more fitly than to be ascribed as the genuine character of the author's brutish philosophy, and he may subscribe it. And the meaning of these words with as much affinity to himself as he bears a relation to a Hume or to his friend Tobin. The poor Negroes in the West Indies have suffered enough by such religion as the philosophers of the North produce, Protestants, as they are called, are the most barbarous slaveholders, and there are none that can equal the Scotch floggers and Negro drivers, and the barbarous Dutch cruelties. Perhaps as the Church of Rome begins to sink in its power, its followers may increase in virtue and humanity, so that many who are the professed adherents thereof would even blush and abhor the very mention of the cruelty and bloody deeds that their ancestors have committed. And we find slavery itself more tolerable among them than it is in the Protestant countries. Now, he wrote this in the Thoughts and Sentiments on the Evil and Wicked Traffic of Slavery. What is the significance of his view? The significance of Cuyano's view is that he is saying that people like Hume and Tobin, though they may argue for the inferiority of black people, live a world of contradiction. So just like you have the Haitian Revolution from 1791, just like you have James T. Holly arguing about black self-determination and governance, the same way that you have Baron de Vaste writing from Haiti about the freedom of the black press, and you have the founding of Freedom's Journal in the 1820s. Black people are responding. And in none of our debates are we centering the fact that black people resist the imposition of white supremacy on them. The debate about Hume misses the point because it elevates the transgression of Hume and his racism to the centerpiece in the negotiation about black people's humanity. The point is that black people knew they were human. They wrote about their humanity. They had a lesson to teach the Enlightenment and Scottish Enlightenment philosophers. But today we're told that we should give credit to Hume because even though he was flawed, somehow he created the very ideas of humanism that black people bought onto for their freedom. See, it's this kind of white supremacist logic that tells us that the slaveholder is also the person we should thank the most for ending slavery. Right? Black people don't owe their humanity to their oppressors. They owe their humanity to the same people that created it, God and themselves. And we forget that because we focus so much, next slide please. We focus so much on the ignorance of Hume because we can't bear to think the fact that the barbarism of the white man has very little to say about the humanity of the black man. Right? And we need to stick with that. We need to stick with that discomfort. That is, in fact, African people that taught Europe something about humanity which they couldn't comprehend. Cuyano directly attacks Turnbull. Right? He talks about the brutality on the slave plantation. He talks about how black people would have their teeth knocked out. Right? But he then talks about the civilization and the hard workingness of West Indian people. That if you think about what God intends for black people, then you would understand the farce, which is European slavery. It is not, Turnbull argued that slavery was a benevolent institution, that they took care of enslaved black people in the West Indies, and that they were much safer there than they were in Africa. Right? I think Scotland has to get used to the idea that there's black scholars now being trained that's going to change their history. Hume's footnote is just the beginning of what we've dug up. And there are going to be lots and lots of young people, right, that have no problem denigrating the moral transgressions of Scotland. So the question is whether or not we're going to be open for it, if we're going to be ready, right? Throughout the 1780s, black abolitionists directly challenged racist Scottish Enlightenment thinking. This is a history that we have to recover. This should be our dedication. We can't keep arguing back and forth about the racism of Hume, trying to find reasons to afford virtue to racist Enlightenment thinkers. Olato Equiano, Cuyano, right? These are people that should serve as our role models. And it refutes the idea that's been advocated by white Scottish historians like Devine, suggesting that these are anachronistic criticisms. Black people have been criticizing white supremacy since they landed on foreign shores. They have repeatedly suggested that to say that Europeans are Christians and follow God, what God could it be that will allow you to enslave another group of people with such cruelty? We find this in Equiano. We find this in Cuyano. We find this in Baron de Vaste. The intellectual history of the world that black people were grasping with after the Haitian Revolution held Europe in contempt for their transgressions against black humanity. So why are we reading Hume's footnote in the context of the other white races of Europe that were hell-bent on black inferiority? Why are we not reading it in contrast to the humanity that black people were proclaiming, both through revolution and through their own narratives? Again, we do this because part of us do not believe that black people are in fact teachers, that they do not have lessons to teach the rest of the world. Africanus was a graduate of Edinburgh, 1859. I actually teach a section of his dissertation in my ethnology class. He made a very similar claim. He said, listen, whereas you say that black people are ignorant, if you give any group of people, any stock of men, right, education and religious instruction, do they not amaze you with the spectacles of their genius? He asks how the European can make claims that the African is in fact inferior to whites when the lowest white man doesn't rise to the education and brilliance of the most educated black man. If the theory of racial inferiority holds that it is blackness that stains the mind and the soul, why then do you have the genius of Africanus, or James McCune Smith, or Frederick Douglass? Hume was witnessing a world where he believed that white supremacy would go unchallenged. He believed that he can say that because the world was being conformed here at the University of Edinburgh and throughout Europe based on the illusion and the myth that white people were the superior race. And time after time, we see that idea refuted. Time after time, we see black men and women pinning evidence showing their genius, refuting it. But where we have fallen short is that we have not used the words of these black thinkers to refute the sentiment that they're extraordinary. The words of McCune Smith, Frederick Douglass, these are not extraordinary because this was the sentiment and tenor of black people who were enslaved. They knew they were free. They knew they were human beings. It is only based on the inventions and lies of the white Scottish Enlightenment thinkers that you have this idea taking hold here. So until we start drawing back to that, no problem. No, next slide. You were right. So until we start drawing back to this and start teaching these courses, right, that are looking at the intellectual history of black people from 1800 forward, actually looking at how they're refuting systematically the notions of white supremacy, revolting against white supremacy, changing their reading of the Bible to justify revolt and freedom, we don't have the substance and the content to reorient history. So in the other course I teach on ethnology, we study line by line how ethnological science, which was birthed here in the Anglo-speaking world, was engaged and refuted by black thinkers. We study the racist texts and their assumption. We talk about how black people like Frederick Douglass in 1854 sought to refute it. We cannot keep practicing anti-colonial theory, black philosophy, and black thought without an orientation to the substance that black people introduced to the world. Said differently, the comparison is not between Hume and Dougald Stewart about whether or not they were racist. The comparison is between Hume and the rest of the black world. And every time we make that comparison, white thinkers fail. They fail that test of humanity. So what we're trying to do off of the back of the report and with the classes that I'm teaching is to create a new perspective, a new everyday consciousness in students in the city that understand the nuances of history and the construction of ideas. So that when you have the apologists who want to say that white supremacists like Hume or Dougald Stewart should get a pass because that's what everyone thought, you can talk to them about the black intellectual traditions that span over 300 to 400 years, where black people have been naming Hume and naming Turnbull and naming Dougald Stewart and James Kyle Pritchard as idiots and of a lower standard of humanity necessary to actually be called philosophers. So I'm urging you that now that you've understood what Hume said and you may be morally offended, right, because it offends your liberal white sensibilities, think deeper. Think about the lack of effort, right? The lack of seriousness. That even though you're sympathetic, right, to this conversation, you have not undergone to actually learn what black people were doing and saying to challenge white people. Think about all the resistance traditions that you have not yet heard about. It's not about your personal feelings here. It's about whether or not we can reorient history. Can we turn the corner so that when we're all dead and gone, this doesn't come back where we're again in the 22nd century arguing about Hume's footnote. We need to reorient the lens and the paradigm of viewing this from the perspective of people who knew about their humanity and were willing to die for it. That was the impetus of the Haitian Revolution, the first Black republic. The idea that in the Black race, there were men who loved liberty and had the idea that they should be free, that that was their natural condition and God's too, that God intended them to be free. Surely that should matter more than what Hume thought about, given that he couldn't get the chair here, right? We have to start talking about the inadequacies of the time, not just our disagreements with the opinions of the people who wrote them. So in saying that, in closing, we really do appreciate what's going on here at the David Hume Institute. It's one of the few examples where we could point to philosophers and say, ha, see, people are listening to actual research. It's a rare thing in this country, a very rare thing. But the other part about it too is it's a reorientation of pedagogy. And we should be very excited because in teaching this material, in educating other Black people in Scotland about this material, there's a long, long history of Black intellectual thought and resistance that we haven't begun to center in this world. And I think that that will be the turning point. The reference is not Hume next to other Scottish Enlightenment thinkers. The reference is whether or not Hume fails the test of humanity around the world. And that's how we should look at the Scottish Enlightenment. So thank y'all very much. I know I'm probably on time.
Well, thank you, Tommy. I don't know if there's much else left to say. I think Tommy has pretty much said what needs to be said in terms of understanding the historic context. So I want to take this opportunity to reflect from the start of this project. I think we had a conversation with Susan some time back in terms of what we can do in really allowing us to be in dialogue and in conversation to understand our role. And for the fact that you've signed up to be here today, I think is a show that you're not prepared to sit alone in a dark room and come up with your own ideas. And I guess we are in a time particularly whereby we are being told in terms of the people that we can hate together or the people that we can like together. And I think being able to have a difference of opinions and to have dialogue sometimes feels like a real challenge. And I do have a particular empathy for complexity, because if you think about this discussion here, it goes to the core of who we think we are. And actually, it also provides us an opportunity about who we can become together by sitting together and thinking. And some of the points that Tommy made earlier was around the teachings, right? And as well, there's learning, but I think there's an opportunity to unlearn. So how do we unlearn some of these untruths? I think it's by also engaging in new dialogue. And as well as unlearning, and I think there's also appreciating that our story is not finished. It's not a completed story, but I think there's an opportunity for us to write a new story together with the new facts that we have. And the point that I really resonated in particular about the points that you made was around dehumanization. So while slavery was a really horrible, horrendous, most evil enterprise, the worst thing of it all was the justification. And that justification is what we see today, because it has been justified through systems, through ways of thinking and the structures that we have. And as well as that, I feel like I'm sort of an evangelist giving hope. But I also feel that there's a way of also rehumanizing and bringing humanity to some of these things that we have formed in our ideas about who we are, but also in thinking about who we can become together. So, and I'm also very delighted to see young people here, because they're our beacon of hope. You make us see things in ways that we can't actually imagine seeing. So I'm really glad that this has been quite a far-reaching dialogue. And it's all our responsibility, and I don't think it's just the David Hume Institute, but also as well as university play a very specific role in terms of knowledge production and informing the public. While that was in the past, the university exists in a present context. So how do you have different philosophical thought of enlightening and helping our young people to be critical in their thinking? And Susan, you mentioned something about curiosity. So I want to add another C to that, which I think is courage, because it takes courage for us to be here, to have this conversation, which can be very confronting, but also to have compassion, because it makes us notice. It makes us see things that perhaps we are not able to see. It's about our shared humanity and who we can become together. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the David Hume for the work that you have done, and also showing courage and bravery and having this discussion, because otherwise it's easy to keep quiet about it. I want to thank Ewan. You look very smart, and and I want to wish you the very best in your new endeavor. But I think the work that you have done, the research, and we've learned a great deal. I've learned a great deal, and I hope that we'll continue to learn together. From my perspective, the work that we are doing, I'm the independent chair for the Edinburgh Slavery and Colonialism Implementation Review Group, in that order. So this is all very much aligned to what we are doing. So we are looking at how we can work with our schools to be able to develop curriculum that can support our young people in terms of how they think about the history and the complexity of that history, and also to use art. People say whenever there is a crisis, artists are called to work. And now we need our artists to come and to be able to say the things that we cannot say with words. And as well as to think about the city itself, the different institutions. I don't think that there's anyone here that can say that they are not touched or in some ways don't have links. We are all steeped in it. And I just want to leave you by saying that we have a duty and an obligation, at the least, to have a discussion, to share what you've had today, and continue being in dialogue. I think it's the most radical thing you can do, is to be in conversation. So thank you.
So if I can ask you to come up and have a seat. We've got a few minutes where we can have questions. If anyone wants to. Yeah, is that okay? If you don't mind.
Any side.
While you're doing that, one of the things that was momentous in this project for me was how people came together that had never met before. And the young people from the Royal High School won't know this, but I was so emotional when I listened to two of you being interviewed on the Guardian podcast, and Severin is over on that side, when one of you said something about it. You were being interviewed on Tommy's review and project, and one of you said, no, we need to feel uncomfortable. We need to learn about our past. And I'm paraphrasing, so if you want to say it, whatever it was you said on that, it really made me go, oh my God, this is brilliant, because that wouldn't have happened without this project. And this project is very much a moment in time. We're only funded for a year, but that sentence gave me confidence that everything that Tommy said about the moral obligation to continue this conversation will happen way beyond the life of this project. And all of you in this room and the other people joining us downstairs will help to do that. So that's my little two pennyworth before I open up to questions. So has anyone got any questions for our two staff speakers? So the microphone's for the recording, just in case you want to.
Okay. So I'm the racial equalities lead and a language teacher at Royal High School. So I remember, I think it was a couple of months ago, where you were, Mr. Curry, talking there. And there is something I was thinking, is because it's very difficult in a secondary school to make people open their eyes about what's the world we're living in. So some of the things you teaching at university, I was wondering, would it be possible to bring that back more into the mainframe of secondary school, because that's what we are missing. So I tend to find what the students tend to study in school tend to be more to do with negative destinations, slave trades, or what's happening in America in the 60s or 70s, but nothing else. So when we do Black History Month, tend to be the same thing. So if I ask a student, can you name me somebody from Nigeria or Pakistan or India that matters before the 20th centuries, very often the student will not know. So when can we bring that back into the Scottish education? Because the earlier we start, the easier I feel like it will be when they move on. I think it would be great to have those students come into uni when they have already that background, rather than for them, because I've done history, Black African history at university, and I was shocked to discover so many things when I went to university. I wish I would have found out before that. Sorry, been talking for quite a long time. But what do you think we should do from your perspective? What, in terms of history, what should we be teaching in secondary school?
No, I think that's a great question. Forgive me, because I come from a country where there were Black Studies courses in high school. So I think you should teach Black history. And I don't think the focus should be on slavery. I think the focus should be on civilization and resistance. You know, there's a tendency, this is still a very strange country for me, so I apologize. But I come, as an American coming here, it's strange because our whole tradition since birth, especially being from the South, is to understand the system of white supremacy that will affect your life. So we don't have kind of a burgeoning consciousness of Blackness the same way as in this country. So when you know, it's very difficult for my wife and I to understand, like, you know, when our daughters come home and say, oh, we read Frantz Fanon. I was like, okay, before Du Bois, before, you know, it's anachronistic to us. So I really think, and I'm happy to work with secondary, you know, institutions to do this. I really think we should develop a Black history curriculum that can be rolled out in Scottish secondary schools that focus on concrete themes of resistance, civilization, and then resocialization. Because we're not dealing with a situation where we don't have plenty of, even in Scotland, like James McCoon Smith was at Glasgow, Douglas was here, you know, you have, you know, Sanchez, you have a whole bunch of Black people that are coming through Edinburgh lecturing and resisting, you know, this idea of Black people just being slaves. So why are we not teaching that? I mean, that's squarely Scottish history. And then when you draw those ideas into the larger anti-colonial context, right, with your Fanon, your Césars, your Senghors, et cetera, you get a plethora of Black people that are criticizing the white supremacy throughout the UK. That's the message that needs to be passed on to these students in high school, because when I get them, they're completely lost. I teach the graduate seminars, the honor seminars at the university in Black intellectual thought, and it's the first time that anyone's being introduced to this idea. So I think, again, I'm happy to speak with you about it. I think we teach resistance traditions, starting with the Haitian Revolution, letting people know that there was a Black free republic in the, you know, early 19th century that debated ideas of democracy. They debated the rule code and about economics and how that impacts Black people's life chances. And then we show how that spread throughout the world. Douglas talked about it. James McCoon Smith talked about it. Ida B. Wells talked about it. They lectured all through Europe about the idea of Black freedom because they had refuted the notion that Black people didn't desire liberty, right? I think that would do a tremendous good for the society and for the country. Because what I see happening right now is you have this, and I don't even know this guy's name, the PM, Biggs, Miles something, right, that was saying that it was a waste of time to engage in telling this history. And if you have people, if you're voting for people like that, that think that telling the truth about what the Scottish Enlightenment was and defining the mission of universities, right, where you can say, hey, a project looking into their legacy is a waste of money, but we could go draw pictures of people that have been dead for hundreds, you know, like, it's always with Black people that our thought becomes problematized. Our telling the story becomes the problem. If we can institutionalize the freedom that Black people sought, the religion that they reinterpreted, how they thought about God differently and Christianity differently, their visions for an equal society. Those are notions that I think inform not only philosophy, but the very kind of people that Scottish children want to be. And I think that it fits well within the kind of pedagogy of what can be done in secondary education, because we did it in the US.
Irene, you've been involved in some curriculum work with the review group. No?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, so in part, one of the recommendations that we have is looking at education. So I think we have the head of education is part of the group that we're working with. So what we're really trying to work with schools is to have a coherent way of teaching this history, but also to draw different knowledge that encompasses not just the history of empire, but as Tommy was saying, a history that tells a full story, not just a partial story, and to use different, because the city of Edinburgh is there's a lot of ways that, our young people can learn. We have lots of museums and galleries here. So how those can also be used as places of learning, and also just within the city itself. So there's one of the recommendations which is looking at reinterpreting some of the street names and buildings. So this can also become as part of a learning for our young people to engage. And I don't think that this curriculum is something that can be developed in isolation, again, like a few groups of people in a room together, but one that requires a wider dialogue, and I think educators like yourselves. But increasingly, I don't know, I'm not an educator, but I imagine that we are all a consequence of the system and the education that we received. And how in part is also to develop and support the confidence of our teachers also to be able to teach this history in a critical way that empowers, and one that does not repeat some of that. So I think that would be really interesting. And, university then again comes in.
No, absolutely.
In terms of research and helping develop that.
I mean, there's no reason that the city couldn't create a subsidy for teachers to come into these classes and actually learn. Like, you can do like a little certificate where they take 3 or 4 classes in history, resistance thought, etc., and that they use this and develop curricula at the end of it. There's no reason that we can't do that. The real question is always the intent and the seriousness that the city of Edinburgh and the university have in producing people that can teach and master this material, right? It's no different. I mean, because what you're basically asking is, are teachers competent enough in the primary materials, like what Douglas wrote or what X, Y, and Z wrote, to give a lesson on it, right? And those are things that you can easily teach within a course, right? That's 2 hours long for 11 weeks. So the real issue here is whether or not our institutions and I think the city, right, and whoever controls education here are serious enough about the issue to do something. And I think that's where we have to either put pressure or we have to be very critical of them for not doing anything on this topic.
So we've probably got time for one more question. Omar.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. My name's Omar from Colourful Heritage in Glasgow. We've done a lot of work on South Asian heritage in Scotland for well over a decade. And I guess my question is, in context of the rise of the Farage narrative, the reform narrative, the anti-migrant narrative, what you're talking about today resonates in a way, always been relevant, but resonates even more powerfully for young people. The us and them narrative has never been stronger. So I guess the question I've got is, what, in your view, is the context as to why the Scottish educational system to date has not been changed to recognise and to teach correctly the colonial history, or indeed to whitewash the role of the British Indian Army out of World War I and II and all of these other components? Why has that not been done so far to date? So what were the factors as to why they wrote the history the way it's been written? Is it some moral guilt there? And number two, frankly, is it ever going to change?
I mean, look, I come from the States, man. Like, change is relative, right? Black people thought they had civil rights, and then Trump comes in, we don't anymore, right? So change is a very touchy subject. Do you have the elements in this country, unlike my country, to re-educate people so that fascism, and this kind of hatred for racial difference doesn't become part and parcel of the culture, I think you have a better chance in America, right? But it means people have to do things. And what I've observed in this country is that you have groups of white people, some are liberal that feel guilt for what happened, but they don't do anything. They just kind of perform guilt. The other side are people who are quieter, but when they get the opportunity, they take a very strong stance on why anything dealing with black people is ideology, wokeism, etc. But those people that often don't say a lot, but say a lot when at a very specific moment, those people seem to be the ones that the Scottish system gives an incredible amount of legitimacy and authority to. So until Scotland and until the city, it becomes adamant and serious about the ways that white supremacy and racism still operate in their civil and polite systems, you're not going to get change. Because what's at contest here is not the legitimacy of the scholarship, right? It's not as if these ideas have not won in the marketplace of ideas. Because outside of the people like Divine, I don't know of any other historian that's writing that doesn't take racism seriously, right? So what's the issue? Well, then the issue has to be, well, the people who are designing curricula are not paying attention to the actual debates as they're happening within university and academic discourse. So who are they putting in charge then, right? See, like, that's how I ask questions. And I don't know the answer to those questions because I don't deal with secondary education, I deal with universities. If the people who are designing the curricula can't answer questions as to why are our students not being given the best and most cutting edge resources for history, then that's a problem where people need to be either put out or replaced, right? You have to think of it this way. The reason that America is in the condition it's in now is because for a long time, white liberals dominated white conservatives and they gave a performance of what they thought racial equality would be. And whereas all these black people kept saying, we know that the world still hates us. No, black person, you're just angry. No, reform, that's how black people in America were talked to for a very long time. White liberals kept black people in line. So I come to this country and what do I find? Oh, let's have a conversation about racism. Oh, that's great. How many people know about racism? Well, not a lot, but we're starting to talk about it. Okay, so you want people who are goodwill that don't know a lot about the subject matter to decolonize a whole curriculum. That's what we're going to do. We're the black people. We don't have any. You see, you create a structure where good intentions fill in for expertise, right? And then when you say, well, why aren't people being taught certain subjects? It's because you don't put the people with expertise in charge of what everybody else does. You want to have conversations with people that feel bad but don't know anything. And that's what dictates how your curriculum and culture works. Your politeness stops real change. I don't come from a country that's very polite. So if you're well-intentioned but stupid, sorry, right? But that's the seriousness about whether or not you want your institutions to change. If there is an impetus for secondary schools to develop curricula that are serious about black history, whoever comes to me and says, hey, Professor Curry, help us design this from this century to this, I will do it. But if you don't have people that are willing to do that, and then we're just going to kind of name white people in the ether, well, some racist entity, then we're not accomplishing anything, right? We have to change things, you have to focus on power and policy. So evidently the group, right, that we have here that's trying to change things, we don't have power, and we evidently don't know who's controlling policy. We should probably find those two things out. And then once we find those things out, that's what we aim to change. Because if you're deeply serious about preventing Farage from taking over the minds of these children in the next 20 years, you have to stamp him out. And by doing that, I mean you have to defeat his ideas very publicly, very adamantly, right, and continuously. And that's what didn't happen in my country. In my country, they kept letting white liberals rule everything, and they kept putting their hope in every election. And then while everybody kept telling them racism's growing, look at the Tea Party, look at the alt-right, look at Trump, they're saying, no, this is an aberration. So then all the working class black people that understood what was going on, they never got into universities. And now that you have all the white liberals that are being squashed out of universities, my people have nothing. That is exactly what will happen here in 20 or 30 years, when the people who we thought were liberals and trying to do the right thing are not in power because reform has built off of sentiment, built off of fear, built off of xenophobia, and then attacked professors who are trying to tell the truth to change people's minds. Hate and fear is a very powerful thing. And any country can be subjected to it, especially European countries. Your whole history is built off of it, right? So if we're serious about it, then that means that at the ground level, people have to change. like concretely change, right? And concretely fight for the minds of the young people that are going to be captured by the ridiculousness of people like Farage.
Goodness. Yeah, I don't want to stop this conversation now,
I understand.
but
I probably
the
went on
clock
too
is
long.
against us. I think where we are is you've given us a really clear idea, Tommy, of what all of us now need to do in the room to go forward, so that we don't. The thing that we never wanted to happen was this just to be a project that stayed in this year. And I know we're getting towards Christmas, but the year's about to change. This conversation has to continue. And we know, we've always kind of gone in around the lens of the story so far, because there's always more evidence coming through as more research is done, and we find out more things. So it's never like, this is just it, and this is what we're going to teach at people, because actually we don't know. We're always learning, and as long as we always continue learning and learning from each other rather than sitting in a dark room on our own, I think there's a chance that maybe bad things won't happen in the UK, but maybe. It's a slim chance. But anyway, at this point in time, what we've arranged is a chance for people to go downstairs and celebrate the conversation so far, carry on the conversation, and meet people that have maybe been involved in different elements of the project that you've not met yet, because I know people in this room haven't met, and I know you will enjoy meeting. We have also, fingers crossed, although I've not checked, I'm getting the thumbs up, we will have a small performance from another group of young people that have been involved in the project. So hopefully that will give you hope that the conversation can continue and carry on continuing for many years to come, so that more people learn much more in school about this. I know the history that I learned at school, when I didn't question it at the time, but I know far more about Henry VIII's wives than I ever really wanted to know. And it wasn't really until I saw the musical Six that I actually questioned, why did I know all about the women and not really much about what was going on in the world at the time? But hey, someone told me I should know that. Don't want to take away from this project, but I just think we need to continually question what we're being told, why we're being told it, who's telling us it, and make sure that we're all learning from each other. So that's been the curiosity that's led this project all the way through, and we hope that curiosity will continue with all of you going for many years to come. And good luck with everything you take forward out of this project. All the resources are on our website. They can all be used, including Tommy's lecture from tonight will be on the website soon. So do use it in your school or the other schools that are involved in the project too. And we'll just keep cascading messages around, although our work on it will be more integrated in other projects going forward as we hand on the mantle on this bit of the work to other people. So good luck everybody, and thank you very much for all your help and support throughout the project.